Hi, everyone. Welcome to a virtual Factory Berlin. My name is Charlotte Hook, and I'm one of the events programming managers here. This is normally the part in the event where we'd ask you to turn to your left or turn to your right and introduce yourself to your neighbor. Since we're doing this event online, I would kindly ask that you drop a message in the YouTube chat and tell us where you're joining from. In the meantime, I can tell you a little bit more about Factory Berlin. Factory Berlin is a diverse, curated community of over 4,000 creators and innovators, and we bring together the most diverse entrepreneurial people who support and empower each other's work. 1 second. Sorry about the reverb. Anyways, let me start that again. So like I said, Factory Berlin is a community of over 4,000 creators and innovators. We still have some technical glitches, but we do have a lot of fun. We bring together the most diverse, creative, ambitious, entrepreneurial people, and we bring together people from the tech scene, people from the art scene, technologists, creatives, corporates, startups, really everyone that you can think of, but all with these shared qualities of supporting and empowering each other. And in turn, we support and empower them. So we have our physical spaces, which allow them to connect in person. We have our digital network, which allows them to connect online. And finally, we have events and programs like these, which allow them to connect around shared interests and big ideas. This particular masterclass is very special to us. It's programmed by one of our circles. So circles are community-led sub-communities at Factory Berlin. They're entirely member-led. They host events and meetups around industry topics and build community and connect. So we're super grateful to have the Future of Work Circle having connected and created this event for us. And their captain, Mike Robick, will be leading the Q&A section afterwards. So finally, with no further ado, I'd just like to introduce our headline speaker. Nash is an executive coach and a professor of leadership and management. He's here to share his advice for creating purpose-driven, meaningful OKRs that can truly transform a business. So he's going to give us 45 minutes of presentation, and then Mike will moderate an audience Q&A for 15 minutes. So drop your questions in the YouTube chat during the talk, and please enjoy. Hi, Nash. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Karen. Thank you so much. I'm applauding for myself. Actually, there's a mosquito buzzing around my face, so if you see me twitching, you'll know why. Hey guys, it's a real pleasure to be here. I wanted to thank Mike Romick for inviting me, and to Charlotte and to the factory. You know, it's a privilege to be here, and I'm really grateful. I wanted to talk to you guys today about a topic that I'm truly passionate about, and that's the topic of transformation. I think you might have expected me to say OKRs, but I'll get onto that in just a minute. You see, transformation is a topic that it's a vehicle for us right now. I think that the world there are many levels of transformation happening on the level of business, on the level of individuals who work for companies, and on the level of the impact that companies can have both on society and on the environment. And I think that's the opportunity that we have today. And transformation is the vehicle that we can use to walk in and step into that opportunity. And the reason OKRs are interesting is because OKRs are the tool by which we can actually create transformation in human lives, transformation in business results, and transformation in the world in which we live. And that's what I'm truly passionate about. That's what I want to bring to you today. And so I think right now, as I look around at the world of OKRs, I see a lot of promise. I see a lot of potential and opportunity, but I also see a reality that's kind of lagging behind that potential. And that there is a gap in between the results that we're currently experiencing in business and in those areas that I mentioned, and in the results that we're getting today. And that's what the topic of this session is all about, is how do we actually bridge that gap between opportunity and the current existing reality. And so, you know, when I refer to OKRs as a tool, I don't want you to think that I'm putting OKRs down in any way, shape, or form. Because if you think about it, right, it's tools that have enabled society, humanity, and the species to actually evolve. It's our ability to create tools and to harness and then assimilate those tools, whether it's the needle, whether it's the wheel or the internet, it doesn't matter. But all of those were tools that we used in order to create transformation. And in that very same way, I think that OKRs are a tool that can allow us to transform the experience of human beings within organizations, that can allow us to transform the results the businesses are getting, and perhaps most importantly of all, that can allow us to transform the impacts that we create as organizations on the world in which we live. And that's kind of like the high level, almost philosophical context that I wanted to put to our session today. I hope that's okay with you all. So let's get into it a little bit. Before I do, I guess just for context, it probably makes sense just to say a tiny bit about myself and what I do. I spent the last 10 years working with fast growth companies in the tech sector. I built a method of acceleration, which is called the high impact culture method. And unlike many acceleration methods, high impact culture is focused not on product, on technology, on sales and on marketing and those kind of intelligence aspects of the business. High impact culture is an acceleration method which is focused on organizational health. Organizational health is everything to do with leadership, to do with management, to do with how we set goals, how we achieve, how we build high performance teams, how we run meetings, how we define strategy, how we connect strategy to purpose, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's the other 50% of the equation. If you take intelligence out of the business, health is kind of the multiplier of organizational intelligence. And so the foundational premise of high impact culture is that teams already have the know-how and the intelligence in terms of how to run their business and what decisions to make. High impact culture is about how to make all of that fit together and work in a high performing way. And so there's kind of two principal things that high impact culture does. Number one, it's specifically aimed at fast growth companies, right? And fast growth companies experience a common set of what I call growing pains, teams working in silos, erosion of culture, sometimes loss of team members, sometimes distance from and loss of key customers. So the kind of pains that arise when a company goes from, let's say, 12 or 15 people in size, and it suddenly goes with funding typically up to 100, 150 people in size. So there's a big a set of issues that arise there, and that's what we call the growing pains. So high impact culture is focused on that, and it's also focused on a new paradigm of how do we define success in business. So I simply don't believe anymore that the idea of becoming unicorn is really something that we could consider to be successful. Reaching $1 billion valuation or raising a certain amount of funding is certainly a measure of success, but I don't believe it's success itself. And so success in high impact culture is defined as profit, people, well-being, and the impact that organizations create on the environment, on society, and on people. Okay, so that's just the context for you. There are 3 dimensions of the method. So these are the areas in which we work. The first is organizational purpose. And as it says here, organizational purpose answers the question, how does your organization serve to make the world a better place? And then how does that get reflected into your strategy, your decisions, your actions, the behaviors of the leaders, and everything else in the organization? So the first dimension is organizational purpose. The second is clarity. And clarity really is about where are we going, as an organization, and how do we measure our success? And we work typically in a 90-day cycle, in a 3-month cycle. And then the third aspect of the method is to do with balance. And balance, I believe, is the precondition for building high-performance teams. Okay, so I just wanted to say that the topic today about transformational OKRs and about connecting OKRs with strategy and purpose touches on all 3 of these elements, but is not the whole high impact culture method. This is one aspect of the method, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Okay, so let's talk specifically about OKRs, right? So OKRs come with a ton of promise, right? A ton of potential. I was reading the There Be Giants report in 2019 and 2020, and some of the things that they suggest as reasons as to why organizations adopt OKRs are things like and these hopefully will be familiar to you, are things like alignment among teams, higher levels of motivation, greater level of focus, better communication of strategy and vision, greater autonomy within the teams, and these kind of things. These are the things that people cite as to why they would adopt OKRs. But actually, I have a little bit of a challenge to that. And my challenge is that if you look at the trajectory of OKRs, they've been around for a number of years. Most people know, they came from Andy Grove at Intel. So they've been around for a while. But it's only fairly recently that they've received the kind of traction and the kind of spread and speed of expansion that we're now seeing. And there were kind of two critical moments that gave rise to that spread and that expansion. And they were the Holy Grail, the Bible of OKRs, or so-called Bible of OKRs, Measure What Matters, and Rick Clow's YouTube video on how Google are implementing OKRs. And those were the two kind of seminal moments that really pushed OKRs onto a different level in terms of their adoption. And it wasn't long after that Netflix and LinkedIn and Twitter and every other company in the tech world started talking about and adopting OKRs. So while the reasons that we cite as to why we might be interested in using OKRs are about alignment and strategy and motivation and so on, I believe the real reason, or the most, I don't want to say the real reason, but the most fundamental reason is actually to do with transformation, right? It's no wonder that it happened after Google talked about it, because Google's culture is synonymous with 10x, right? Whether it was the Gmail story or Chrome or YouTube, these are all examples of how Google used OKRs and actually attributed a lot of their success to the adoption of OKRs. So I think that the real thing that people are looking for is, how do I 3x, 5x, or 10x my impacts, my results, using OKRs? And that's the topic that I'm not sure is getting enough traction and attention. That's what I really want to focus on today. So if that's the promise and that's the potential, then it makes sense to me, at least, to look at some of the reality on the ground. Now, I'm not trying to say this is the whole picture, but certainly some of these insights point to some realities in the field of OKRs. So this survey said 85% of respondents adopted OKRs to improve alignment with vision and strategy. Yet when asked how successful they felt they had been in achieving their goals after 1 year of using them, the average response was 6 out of 10. Another survey, this one was focused on product teams, said that fewer than 15% of respondents felt that OKRs delivered noticeable performance and improvement and greater customer value. And Ben Lamort, who's the founder of OKRs.com, who's written in 2021, just published the book, the OKRs Steelbook, and he's literally coached hundreds of organizations. And he says that in his estimate, in his experience, roughly 50% of companies who take up OKRs then go on to abandon them, right? And then if we want to take a slightly more high-level perspective, and if the understanding is that OKRs are there to help companies become more successful, then we would expect to see that there's greater success rates in the startup ecosystem. Yet when I look at the Harvard Business School study by Shikhar Ghosh, it says 75% of venture-backed startups fail. In Vern Harnish's book, Scaling Up, he's saying 96% of companies remain mice. Mice, in his definition, is companies that don't reach revenues of 10 million or more. So to me, all of this is pointing to some issues with the way in which OKRs are being practiced. I just want to say a little bit more about that before we then talk about some of the fundamental problems and some of the solutions. So those are some of the industry insights. I wanted to share from my experience of working with fast growth companies in tech, and specifically working with them on their OKRs. What is it that I'm seeing in practice as far as results are concerned? So I've said here a minority are achieving 3, 5, or 10x. The truth be told, I can't think of a single company that has come to me and asked me for help in general with high impact culture and has been receiving 3 or 5x or 10x results. That may not be surprising to you, but as I interact with the ecosystem in general, my impression is also similar, that there are very, very small number of companies that are achieving 5x or 10x. That's not to say that they're not getting some value from them, though, okay? A lot of companies talk about increased focus and alignment and direction. But generally what I'm seeing in my experience is 1.2x, 1.3x. And that's good and that's fine, but it's certainly not what the promise of OKRs is. And it also has to be weighed against the cost of OKRs, because as you all know, there is no playbook for how do I implement OKRs in my company. It depends on your culture as an organization, your size, your industry, all of these different factors. So there's no simple playbook. It's not a plug and play thing. You have to invest time, effort, energy, and then you have to develop a process. You have to make sure people are following that process. You have to do the reflect cycles. You have to extract your learnings and then apply. So there's a lot of work associated with OKRs. Let's not pretend there isn't. And if you're only getting incremental gains, then I think that raises some questions as to what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong. Okay. And as I said earlier on, so a lot of companies are taking them up and then abandoning them. So that's something that needs to be addressed. So I would like to break down for you what I think are 3 fundamental issues in the way in which we practice OKRs. And if you're expecting me to talk about issues relating to implementation, like, for example, how many OKRs you should have, whether you're setting key results as objectives, whether you have the right number of key results, whether they should be tied to performance or not performance, whether the key results should be result or activity, all of that stuff, I believe, has been very well covered by many experts in the field, and it's not what I intend to talk about today. I don't really want to talk about implementation side of things. I want to talk about fundamental issues that I think are contributing to the underperformance of OKRs in the ecosystem today. Okay, so there's three fundamental issues. I'll quickly go through them, and then I'll go into more depth and share the solutions for each one of those 3. Okay, so the first one is OKRs are being wrongly treated as a solution. They're being wrongly treated as a solution. I'm going to expand and develop on these ideas. The second one is that oftentimes, and I don't know, maybe you can think about your last OKR definition cycle and see whether you resonate with this or not. But oftentimes, 100% of the people involved in the OKR definition don't walk out of the room 100% sure that they've identified the most important issues for the business in the next 90 days. Okay, so I think the second level, or second fundamental issue, is that you don't necessarily achieve agreement that these are the most important OKRs for the next 90 days. And as I'll explain, when that happens, that gives rise to a certain set of problems. And the third one is that I think we're in the habit of defining OKRs that are valuable for the business and for the performance of the business, but fundamentally don't tap into the innate desire that human beings have to contribute and to do work that truly matters. So in other words, people care about the OKRs, but I'm not sure they care enough so as to fight for their success when they're faced with challenge in the implementation. Okay, so let me go into all of those a little bit more and share some solutions. So the first one I said was OKRs are wrongly seen as a solution. I'm sure many of you here have experience with a CRM, right? Now, when you bring a CRM into your company, I don't imagine that you bring Pipedrive or Salesforce into the company and assume that Pipedrive or Salesforce is going to generate more sales for you, right? When you bring a Pipedrive or a Salesforce into your company, you have to do work to make it work for you. You have to connect it with other systems. You have to set it up in the right way. You have to make sure it's in the right hands. There might need to be some training. And so essentially the mindset around a CRM is that a CRM is a useful tool. And if we use it in the right way, it should help us to streamline and accelerate our sales process. But funnily enough, when it comes to OKRs, in my experience, what I'm often seeing is that people adopt OKRs and they expect them to plug and play. You expect them to stick them into the company and that they should deliver results. And I'm sure most of you will testify to the fact that it doesn't actually work that way, right? In Ben's book, The Field Guide, he talks about OKRs as a critical thinking framework. And he mentions the word learning 91 times in the book. And the reason that is because OKRs are a framework for us to accelerate our learning about what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and how to accelerate business performance. But if we look upon them as a solution and we don't look upon them as a tool, when they don't work, guess what happens? When they don't work, people say the OKRs are not working. Whereas if we see them as a tool, and if they're not working, what are we likely to say? We're likely to say, what do we need to do differently to make the OKRs work? And that is a fundamental difference that will, I believe, can contribute significantly to the difference between success and failure in OKRs. So what are 3 simple ways you can overcome this mindset issue? Number 1 is sit down as a team, as a leadership team, and ask yourself, why are we using OKRs? What are the problems we hope to overcome? What are the benefits we hope to gain? That's the first question, and write that down. Second of all, what's needed for our success? What are we going to need to be great at? How are we going to need to do this to ensure that we're successful? And how are we going to improve relentlessly, because it's a learning framework? And I believe if you just take the time to answer these basic questions, you're indirectly addressing a mindset issue, and you're going to create a culture of ownership around OKRs that's going to make the difference. I wish I could ask you at this point whether that's resonating with you, but I'm going to assume that it is, and I'm going to move on to the second one, but feel free to ask any questions at the end. Mike is going to capture those. So it says here, there are many reasons companies fail with OKRs. The first is a failure to adequately answer the question, why are we adopting OKRs? So I highly recommend and encourage you to go back, even if you're already using them, to go back and answer those questions. Second issue. Imagine you have an OKR cycle where the reset or the definition process is slightly rushed, or is not done in the right environment, or there's not the right level of engagement with the team in discussing and debating and disagreeing and arguing over what is truly the most important priority for the next 90 days. And then you go to execution. What happens in that scenario? In fact, I was doing a reset process. I'm doing a reset process right now. And the reflection that the team had for the last 90 days was that they defined an OKR, but when they got down to, or they defined a key result, but when they got down to execution, they weren't really too sure whether that was the right key result. And guess what happened mid-cycle? They decided to abandon the key result. Why? Because they weren't focused on thinking, what do we need to do to maximize our chances of success? Instead, they were thinking, is this really the right thing that we should really be focusing right now? Is this the most important thing? So when that creeps into our mind, when we don't have the right discussion up front, it has a knock-on impact into the way in which we go about execution. Okay, so again, what is the solution? How can we address that? I think it's fundamental that you get out of the office when it's time to do the OKR reset process. Okay, the office is a busy environment. It's conducive to working in the business, and it's not so conducive to working on the business, right? So you need that ability to zoom in and zoom out, to pulse in and pulse out. And getting out of the office, getting into a different environment where you don't have emails, your phone's not going off, people aren't just interrupting you all the time, is the first crucial step. Second of all, you got to be with the relevant people. And companies that I work with in high impact culture, we consistently spend at least 1, and if not 2 days, every 90 days out of the office per quarter, focusing on that bigger picture. So I highly recommend that you have the right discussion in the right way in order to make sure that when you actually get to execution, that people are not questioning whether these are the right OKRs. Instead, they're thinking, how are we going to make this OKR happen? And that leads me nicely onto my third. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed a quote here. How could I do that? This is the key quote by the father of OKRs, and he says this: an effective goal-setting system starts with disciplined thinking at the top, with leaders who invest time and energy to choose what really counts. Okay, that's from Andy Grove. So on to the third issue and third solution. So the third issue I mentioned already is about people I'm not saying they don't care, I'm saying they don't care enough. So oftentimes when you look at the OKRs that are being defined, you'll see OKRs relating to KPIs, and that's perfectly sensible and perfectly normal. So you might see OKRs relating to improving the lead to sales conversion ratio, or the number of leads, or lowering the customer acquisition cost, or whatever the case may be. Let me make this point loud and clear. There is nothing wrong in KPIs. There's nothing wrong in defining KPIs as metrics that you want to transform within your key results. The problem arises when those key results are not in the context of a purpose that people truly understand and truly care about. Right? So if they can't see how improving customer acquisition cost is actually having a benefit to people's lives and their well-being, then again, their level of commitment, innovation, problem-solving, collaboration, all of the qualities that you need to create that 2x, 5x, or 10x is not necessarily going to be present. Instead of that, you often see, again, a high rate of abandoning OKRs or people looking for reasons why they can't achieve the KRs in that cycle. Whereas if people believe that the purpose of the organization is something they truly care about, for example, the company I'm working with, they define their purpose as improve the livelihoods of independent music creatives, so people who are the independent music creators, to improve their livelihoods and to use the proceeds of music to catalyze social justice. That is their purpose. And so they have a number of initiatives going, and they're in touch with the musicians that they serve, and they can see how their platform and their service is actually providing them with a livelihood. So when they talk about key results and specific KPIs, they can actually see how the change in those KPIs translates into an improvement in people's lives. And that's what drives an extra layer of care, innovation, and performance that I believe can make the difference. And I wanted to say quickly that solution 3, which I'm about to share with you, is really predicated on solutions 1 and 2 already being in place. Okay, so I wouldn't skip to solution 3 if you're not already doing solution 1 and 2. Okay, with that said, here's solution 3. At a high level, and I'm going to go on to explain exactly how you might do this in the rest of today's session, right? But at a high level, there are 3 things that you can do to overcome the fundamental issue of people not caring enough about the success of their OKRs. The first is to actually define a compelling purpose as an organization, right? The second is to define a strategy, probably the most used word in business, but I'll go on to hopefully clarify exactly what I mean by strategy. So to define a strategy which actually seeks to achieve and fulfill that purpose, so that you can see that clearly there is an alignment between strategy and the purpose, and then to identify what is the most important strategic priority we have in the next 90 days and focus your OKRs into that. So there is a clear line of connection between the key results and the KPIs that we're trying to create transformation in, and the strategic priority that we need to address in the next 90 days, and how that links into our bigger picture strategy, which exists to fulfill our purpose. And all of this comes back down to a fundamental idea about business. We have to choose in which camp we are. We either believe that business exists to make a profit, in which case none of this is necessarily relevant, or we believe that business exists to create solutions for society, and create social value, and that profit is a byproduct of the social value creation process. And high impact culture is very much based in that viewpoint. And if that's what you believe, then it's critical that you have this compelling purpose, that the strategy is aligned to that purpose, and you have OKRs that are then derived from strategy. So all of this might sound, or at least this part might sound a little bit high level. So allow me to take the next, 12, 15 minutes or however long it is, to go into a 5-step process, which I believe can help you to actually achieve this. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to take a little bit of a side step and then come back to this. Jonathan Trevor, who wrote the book Align, is a professor of management and leadership at the Oxford Saïd Business School. He wrote a fantastic book called Align. And in that book, he presents what's called the enterprise value chain. Now, the enterprise value chain is basically a series of interdependent components that create a strategically aligned company, right? And we all want one of those, right? We all want a strategically aligned company. So I'm going to present to you a simplified version of this value chain, which consists of only 3 components. His one has more, and you can check it out online. There's a Harvard Business Review about it. But in this version, there are 3 components. The first is purpose, and I already mentioned that purpose should articulate not where are you going and what does success look like. It often gets confused with other words like mission and vision. But purpose specifically answers the question, how does your existence as a company make the world a better place? Okay, so that's the first element of the value chain. The second is a strategy. And the strategy is simply a plan of how you're going to go about meeting the needs of your customers, how you're going to go about differentiating yourself, from the competition in order to fulfill that purpose, right? So first is how your existence makes the world a better place. The second is how you plan to go about fulfilling that purpose, and the third then is the OKRs, the systems and measurements that you need to perform in order to execute your strategy and therefore achieve your purpose, right? So if you take that context in mind, then now let's consider the fact that the value chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So if there is a link between purpose and strategy that's weak, then that's going to undermine the entire value chain. Likewise between strategy and OKRs. So what we need is strong links across those 3 pieces. Okay. And so I would like to present to you what I think are 5 steps that can help you to overcome the issue number 3 that I mentioned, which is that people don't care enough to fight for the success of the OKRs and fight for transformation. So here are those 5 steps. Number 1 is you actually need to spend the time to uncover your organizational purpose. The second is you need to then map a strategy, which, as I said before, takes you to that purpose. The third is you need to identify what are our strategy execution gaps. And again, I'm going to go into all of these in more detail. Number 4 is you then define or draft your OKRs coming out of that context conversation about strategy. And then you validate your OKRs and you explain them in the context of your purpose. So you clearly say and make a link and say, our OKRs are there, and this is how they contribute to our purpose. Okay, so these are the 5 steps. So once again, let's go into a little bit more depth on those points. So the first one is about uncovering your purpose. Your purpose should do 3 things. Number 1, it should explain how your existence makes the world a better place. Number 2, it should actually light you up. You could think of purpose as energy. It's an additional energy that you find when you're encountering challenge and difficulty and setback that allows you to persevere. And those of you who are operating already a business that you feel is aligned to your purpose will know that you get that extra energy from that. So the purpose should certainly light you up, and it should be both authentic and it should be practical. It should be authentic, it should be true to who you are. It's not some aspirational thing. It's about why, how your existence already exists to serve people and society. And it should be practical. In other words, we should be able to make decisions about who we hire, what products and services we want to offer, which ones we don't want to offer, which markets we want to enter, which ones we don't want to enter, etc., etc. We should be able to make practical decisions using that purpose as a guide. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, this sounds great, Nash, but how the hell do we do that? So I've gone to the trouble of creating a Miro template, which has a framework to help you and all the guidance notes to actually help you to go about uncovering your organizational purpose. It's not something I have a ton of time to go into right now, but at the end of the session, I'll be making an offer to help a certain number of people to go through this process, so stick around for that. And if you don't want to stick around for that or don't want to necessarily have handheld help through this process, you can certainly use the templates that are free and available via the links that you're going to get through this presentation. Okay. So the second step, the first one is to uncover the strategy. The second one is to map your strategy. So strategy should answer 5 fundamental and basic questions. Okay. It should answer, what are the products and services that you offer? Who do you offer those products and services to? Where and which locations do you offer those products and services? How do you plan to meet the needs of your customers? And how do you differentiate yourself from the competition? So those are the 5 basic and fundamental questions that the strategy needs to answer. And in addition to that, once you've mapped your strategy into these 5 against these 5 questions, the next question that you have to ask yourself, if you want to build a strategically aligned organization, is first of all, if we achieve this strategy, do we achieve our 1-year financial targets? Because there's no good having a strategy which is not aligned with the business plan, right? So you have to validate for yourself that the strategy that you have defined is capable of leading you to that 1-year financial target. And if the answer happens to be no, then obviously you need to go back and revise the financial targets, or you need to go back and revise the strategy. Okay, so assuming the answer is yes, there's one more question that you need to answer before you move on to the 3rd step. And that question is, if I look at all of the different components, in other words, the post-its that make up the strategy map, if I look at all of those different components about the products and services that I offer, the areas I offer them, how I plan to meet the needs of my customers, and how I differentiate, if I look at those in light of my purpose, can I say that my strategy is aligned in all of those elements to achieving the purpose? And if it's not, then you might want to mark some of those post-its as red, as in you might want to stop doing some activities, and you might want to add some activities which you want to mark as blue, which are activities that you either want to start or continue doing in order to have a strategic strategy which is aligned to the purpose. Okay, so it's very important that you're able to map the strategy, identify and be clear that it can take you and lead you to your 1-year financial goals, and also be clear that it's actually aligned to your purpose. And then that leads me on to the 3rd point. It might be tempting to skip this point, and you've now got a strategy, you say it's aligned and it's aligned to your purpose, so you might be then tempted to say, okay, well, what are the OKRs? But there's a crucial step in between. And the crucial step is to be able to identify your strategy execution gaps. So what you do in this is you take all of those individual post-its from your strategy map and you park them in one of 3 places. Either you park them in a green traffic light where it says we consistently deliver this element of our strategy efficiently, and we usually deliver it to or above the standard that is expected by our customers, in which case we're executing it well. Or you park it into the amber category, in which case you're saying we fail to deliver this element of our strategy sometimes, and or we sometimes are below the standard that is expected by our customers. Or you mark it as red, in which case you're saying, well, actually, in most cases, we fail to deliver this element, or we're consistently below the standard that is expected by our customers. So this is kind of taking a reality check and saying, yeah, okay, fine, our strategy can get us to our goals and it's aligned to our purpose, great. But actually, how well are we doing in executing it? So I did this exercise with a company in the music tech industry, and I'm going to call them Treble. It's not their real name, but that's what I'll call them. They're a client of High Impact Culture. And we identified back in November last year that they were losing customers at a rate of 1.2 customers per week to their competition. And alarm bells were ringing. And in fact, the CFO said in one of the executive sessions that I was running, in the weekly tactical meeting that I was running, she said, guys, we are at risk of dying from our success, morir del éxito, which means dying from our success, meaning that if we continue to ingest new clients and we don't sort out some fundamental issues, we're going to have so much business, but we're not going to be able to service it, and we're going to lose that. And so there was a lot of ideas and discussion, and in fact, a lot of noise in the minds of people about what they needed to do to kind of resolve this crisis. And they had ideas that they needed to add new functionality, they needed to increase the number of features on the platform, and all of this stuff was being thrown around as different possible ideas. But then we actually did the strategy execution exercise. And let me share with you the overall picture that came out of that exercise. And I don't want you to necessarily study the individual post-it notes. What I want you to do is imagine that you are the leadership team of this company and that you see this picture emerging. So what is this picture telling you? is your strategic priority right now? You don't need to, I know the font on purpose is so small because it doesn't matter what it says. It's what is that distribution of colors telling you is your most important strategic focus right now? Is it on expanding our capabilities and on delivering new features and new functionality? Well, no, it's not, because most of the colors are amber and red. And what the team saw, it was like a slap in the face. What they saw when they finished the mapping exercise was actually the most important priority we have is resolving the strategy execution gap. And what they realized is that their short-term strategic priority was to focus on the speed and the reliability of the platform. And that became their kind of rallying cry for the next 6 months. So everything they did was centered around not expanding their potential, which they would love to have done, but it became focused on bridging strategy execution gap, and in specific, addressing issues of speed and reliability on the platform. And then the objectives and the key results kind of naturally fell out of this process because they had done all the strategic work beforehand. So the 3 key results that they defined, and they only defined one OKR for the next cycle on a company level, 90 days. And what they defined was 3 key results. Number 1 was to reduce the number of customers leaving from 1.2 per week to 0. Number 2 was to reduce the delivery time of music tracks into the DSPs, the Spotify and the iTunes of the world from 28 days to 15, and to reduce the number of complaint tickets by 20%. And they felt that if they achieved those 3 key results, and then they reverse engineered their objective, which would be to improve customer experience and satisfaction, which was all focused around, predominantly focused around improving reliability, excuse me, and speed on the platform. I hope you can see how the investment of time up front on both the purpose and the strategy execution then led to a much easier and more focused and critical conversation around where they needed to focus their efforts for the next 90 days. And then obviously in the cycle, they were able to perform at a much higher level than they had previously been able to, because they had this level of clarity and alignment which had taken place in the steps up to now. And so then on to the last of the final steps. It's very important that you draft your OKRs and then you give yourself a window of, 12, 24, 48 hours before you then try to finalize those OKRs, right? So to give people time to mull over and reflect on them. And what I like to do is come back and ask some validation questions, right? So there are many types of validation questions that you could ask, but one of the favorite ones that I have is, what would be the impact of overachieving your OKRs, and what would be the impact of underachieving your OKRs? And this question gets people to think about what success would really look like, whether they've chosen the right OKRs, because if the impact of overachieving the OKRs is not that great, or the impact of underachieving them is not that significant, then hey, guess what? We probably haven't defined the right OKRs. And then I would then suggest that you still go back and have another iteration on the definition process. Okay, so this is not a box checking exercise. This is a validation exercise to make sure that you're on the right track. And any time you spend now in the definition process is going to pay dividends in the execution process, as I already mentioned. So I'm almost at the end, so and I know I've got 2 or 3 minutes left. So the second validation step is asking yourself the question, by saying yes to this, by saying yes to these key results and this objective, what are we saying no to? Because more often than not, we say yes to everything, and in the process of saying yes to everything, we're actually saying no to everything. Because we all know that we can't get everything done in 90 days. 90 days is a window of time that actually passes pretty quickly. And so it's absolutely important that you spend the time up front to define what are we going to say no to, and write that down and be comfortable and clear about the trade-offs that you're making. And those trade-offs should be a little bit uncomfortable, right? If you're saying no to things that you don't really care about, then I would venture that you haven't been ruthless enough in defining the things that really matter. Somebody once said this quote, and I like it. It says, people often overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10. And I would say that it's true that people often overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 2 or 3. So it's really important, and the essence of strategy is about trade-offs. So it's really important that you're explicit and agreeable as a team as to what are the things that we're going to park and say no to. And that means that we're going to be hyper-focused on a few things that are really going to move the needle on business performance. And lastly, I mentioned this before, is asking the question and writing down your answer as to how do our OKRs actually enhance human relationships? How do they enhance meaning at work? And how do they help us to improve people's lives? How does improving the customer acquisition cost or lowering the lead to sales conversion ratio or whatever other metric, how does that actually materially impact on human beings and the people that we're serving and impacting? And actually spending the time to write a paragraph that explains why is this the most important priority for us as a business right now, and how does it serve to achieve and advance our purpose? And then communicating that along with your OKRs to the rest of the teams. And I think if you follow those 5 validation steps, along with the first 2 solutions that I proposed, I think you'll be setting yourself up for success. And once again, I have defined a template which will allow you to go through all of those steps in the OKR process, all the way from defining your purpose in the first Miro template to then mapping that into your strategy, defining your strategy execution gaps, defining your strategic priority, and then your OKR. So you have a step-by-step process if you want to follow it. So let's just do a really quick recap on the 5 steps. Uncover purpose, map strategy, define your execution gaps, draft your OKRs, and validate. And then the bigger picture of what we've talked about is, number 1 is, let's not look at OKRs as a tool, as a solution. Let's see them as a tool. Let's use those 3 critical questions to develop the mindset of ownership. Let's make sure that we spend the time, the effort, have the right conversations in the right way up front, so as to make sure that when we get to execution, we're really focused on making it happen and not questioning whether these are the right key results. And let's actually tap into the innate desire that people have to contribute to other people's lives and other people's success. And let's tie our key results to something that people are intrinsically going to care about. And that's my takeaway, and that's my proposal for you, to create OKRs that I believe are going to be truly transformational. In terms of next steps, you have 3 options. You can use the Miro templates. You can download the white paper that I've recently written, and I'm in the process of publishing, that goes into more depth on all of these topics. And I'm also going to be running a master course on actually guiding CEOs and executive teams of fast growth companies through this OKR process. And if that's something that interests you and you think could be relevant for you and your organization, then just feel free to reach out to me at nash@nashbillimoria.com, and the link for the white paper is there. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening, and I would love to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nash. That was a rush through, but absolutely amazing stuff.
Mike, I'm having a little issue hearing you right now, so just hold fire.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, I can hear you now.
We can hear you. All right. There we go. So it's on your end. That's fine. So thank you so much. That was fantastic. It was a wild ride through the process, but I think everybody's got a taster of what they can get with you. And we've got a few questions. Would you like to take them?
Of course.
So Gustavo has been the sort of highlight questioner, and he's got a couple. The first, just very simple one, is: do you feel that OKRs are often misinterpreted as short-term KPIs?
I think a lot of companies are using OKRs to manage their business as usual, their day-to-day. And in that sense, they start to track a whole host of different KPIs. I think it can be valuable to use KPIs within the OKR framework, but the emphasis has to be on transformation of those OKRs, on changing the trajectory and the performance in a KPI, and not just maintaining the status quo of a KPI, because that becomes, and that's where, in the high impact culture method, we use the language of health metrics. And health metrics are the indicators, the KPIs that we need to look at to make sure that at the end of the quarter or at the end of the cycle, that we're going to be healthy for our P&L, right? And so KPIs are part of those health metrics, but they're also part of OKRs. It's just that in the context of OKRs, we're very much focusing them in the area of transformation. So how are we going to create a performance change in those specific KPIs that we've chosen? I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. I hope it does for Gustavo. So it's really that OKRs are about transformation and scaling, and the KPIs are managing the day-to-day, in a sense, the business
yes,
as usual.
but like I said, the KPI, the key results can be KPI, can focus on KPIs, but they should be focused on transforming the performance. And say, for example, I use lead to sales conversion ratio. So if you had a 6% leads to sales conversion ratio and you wanted to create a 10% lead to sales conversion ratio, then you might set an OKR to move it from 6 to 10%. But if you wanted to maintain it at 6% to ensure that you're healthy for your P&L at the end of the quarter, then you would keep that as a health metric and it wouldn't form part of your OKRs.
Wonderful. Very clear. And I've got a trickier one, which would be, how do you actually balance purpose and profit? And I say this because, a lot of the startups that we work with are very young. They might have investors, they might not be making profit yet. So they're struggling to make profit. They've got investors breathing down their neck. How do they justify taking time to work on purpose, to align everything? How do you balance those? How do you justify that?
So I suppose you want me to answer this in 10 seconds, right, Mike?
You've got 3 minutes.
First and foremost, we have to start thinking and realizing that it's not having a trade-off mentality. I don't know if anyone's read the book Grow the Pie by Alex Edmonds, who's the finance professor at the London Business School. He recently wrote a book called Grow the Pie. And he's talking about how focus on purpose is actually useful for driving financial value in an organization. But that does not mean that every decision focused on social value is going to be good for the business. So a company needs a framework for making decisions as to which decisions are going to be both good for society and good for business, and which decisions are good for society, but maybe are not going to help our business. We need to have a decision-making framework, a set of criteria that allow us to make that decision as to whether an action should be pursued or not pursued. The thing is that I think we get caught in a trap of trying to decide in the beginning when we're making a decision whether a particular decision is going to have a greater or lesser result on profits. And the thing about profits is they're very hard to predict. You can try to do an NPV calculation on a spreadsheet and say, like let's say, for example, you want to build a gym in your facility. If you're a large organization, like let's say a Google or an Apple or Netflix, let's say they're making a decision as to whether they want to build a gym in their facility. Do they make that decision because they believe it's going to generate more profits? Or do they make that decision because they believe it's going to be healthy for their employees, it's going to create a better work environment, there'll be rich spaces for people from different functional areas to talk and to meet and to spend time, and that in the long run, it will generate financial value? So they would not be able to justify a decision of building a gym or potentially innovations or research and development. A lot of those types of decisions could not be justified if you use an NPV or a profit-focused calculation to try and decide to make decisions. So the idea is that we need to make decisions for intrinsic reasons because they make sense for our purpose, but at the same time, we need a critical thinking framework, a set of steps that helps us to understand are the decisions that we're about to make going to be valuable for our business? Are we best placed? Do we have competitive advantage in this field? Or is somebody else going to be better placed to serve society in this way? How do we intend to generate business value by making this decision? So there has to be that kind of critical thinking framework in order to drive decisions that are focused on purpose.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And you did pretty good in 3 minutes, more or less, answering that.
More or less.
So I think we can go a couple of minutes over, but we've got some further questions, which I think are relevant. One is, do you think that OKRs are meaningful or useful for really quite small startups that are steadily growing, but small, sort of around 5 employees or so?
That's a great question. I think that there are different ways of implementing OKRs. OKRs is not one thing. It's not one blanket approach. If you're an organization, when I started out in my own organization, Remap, and building high impact culture, when we were only 2 and 3 people, we used OKRs, but in a very light way. And what we did is we used the practice of every 90 days, defining the objectives and key results that were going to be most meaningful for us in relation to our strategy and purpose. But that's where we left it. And I didn't obviously have a process of tracking and the whole kind of implementation cycle and all the other things that come around the OKRs. But I think that even if you're 1 person or 2 people, I think it's very useful to take time out of the being in the busy mindset of the urgency of the business. I think it's very useful to take time out on a regular basis every 90 days or so and ask yourself the question, where is a performance change going to have the greatest impact on the business? And how am I going to measure success in that area? And maybe you just want to leave it there and just have that conversation so that at least the 5 of you are on the same page, where you're going and how you're going to measure success. And maybe once a month you check in with those OKRs, and maybe at the end of the 90 days you do a reflect process. So you can adapt the OKRs, but I think that underlying the tool, there's a set of questions that helps us to focus on what's most important. And it doesn't matter whether you're a 5-person or 100-person company or 5,000-person company for that matter. I think those questions can be useful regardless of your size. I think you then have to make practical, pragmatic decisions about how you use the whole OKR methodology within an organization, and it has to be fit for purpose.
Nice. Great. And closing one, you were saying that probably most people overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what they can achieve in 2 or 3 or 10. What do you believe that if more people were putting in place OKRs that are connected to purpose, we could actually achieve in 10 years?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess, part of the magic is that we don't know, right? And sometimes knowing, Mike, can be a stifling thing. It's like, there's all of these situations around the world, whether it's to do with ocean plastics or overfishing of the seas or, issues with social inequality or environmental degradation. There's all of these issues that we're facing as a society. Now, we could get paralyzed asking ourselves the question, are we going to be able to solve these issues in time? Are we going to be able to act quickly enough? Are we going to do enough in time? And I think those are paralyzing questions. But I think liberating questions are questions that say, okay, well, we don't know if we're going to make it, right? It's the old Gandhian principle of being attached to the process and letting go of the outcome. It's what can we actually make a material impact on? Or are we going to spend our time thinking about things that may or may not happen? Or are we going to focus, as Stephen Covey says in the first of his habits, on being proactive? Are we going to focus on the things that we can inherently control? So I think that, there is a world of opportunity in terms of solving some of the critical issues that we face in society, whether they're, all of the issues within the Sustainable Development Goals. I truly believe that, when my kids grow up and are in their teenage years, that we could be living in a completely different world to the one we're living in today. But I don't know that that I don't know. I just don't know. It's an unknown thing. But I do know that it's much more fun, much more fulfilling, and more energizing to be part of a solution as opposed to being part of a problem.
Wonderful. Nash, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to our community and to all those who have connected to this today. And I hope that many of them connect to you and to the factory, of course. We are always glad to have great speakers like you and great listeners like those who are taking part. And we really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Soon.
Thank you to everyone who was on the session. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.